Guys, welcome back to Zach's Gun Rants 2, Part 2, Reloaded. Thank you to the commenters from last video who gave me a much cooler nickname for this video. Let's crack into it.
I want to use this now.
All right.
I need a bunch of
Oh, this is when we left off, this was the Colt M4A1.
5.56 rounds. The rear sight on the M4 has like two settings. One is the 2 to 600.
Okay,
settings.
I know that. That's the only weapon I'm familiar with, so I do know that. You don't need to educate me on this particular weapon. I am very familiar with it.
I bet.
Yeah, here's the thing to remember. When the military trains you on a weapon, and I can tell you this, I went through basic training, believe it or not. Yes, I'm one of the tiny number of officers who has gone through an actual basic training. The actual basic training. But the Army trains you how to perform basic maintenance on your weapon, how to engage targets with your weapon, and how to perform immediate action with your weapon. That is it. Everything else they do not teach you to do, not in basic training, maybe in some sort of advanced maintainer course or advanced marksmanship course. You may see other stuff, but the military does just a truly tremendously good job of giving you only the skills you actually need. Meaning, I still do not know what the rear sight does. I know there's a day sight and a night sight, and then that little windage knob. No one ever taught me what it's for. I mean, I can guess, but don't know.
It's the only weapon I'm familiar. What do you mean, you bet? It's the only weapon I'm familiar with.
Technically, all of the 5.56 green tip is light armor penetrating, but whatever. This is the M4A1.
Yeah, so it's the replacement for the M16A4, which itself was a replacement for the M16A2.
Kind of. The M16A4 and the Colt M4A1 both were used by the same organizations at about the same time. So for the Marines, it was a replacement for the M16A4. But
Yes.
for the Army, they would use the M16A4 or the Colt M4A1.
Yeah, so actually when I was deployed, you would occasionally see soldiers carrying an M16A4. And the reason that you would often see it was basically because those were troops who would almost certainly never be leaving the fob, never leave the wire, never put on gear, and never have to engage the enemy. These were like IT support specialists and the like. Now, the reason that combat troops vastly preferred the M4 and the M4A1 was because it was a carbine. Carbine means that just the barrel is shorter, and therefore the entire weapon was more compact. And while you lose a little bit of muzzle velocity and a little bit of accuracy at range, the trade-off is that when you're doing, say, house clearing operations or room clearing, right, you have a weapon that is much more agile, right? Imagine you're entering a small closet, right, and you have a weapon that is this, as long as a person's torso. You're going to end up with it's just going to be more unwieldy to move around. In contrast, M4A1, your barrel's only going to be, maybe 6 inches in front of you. It makes a huge difference in compact spaces. It also makes a big difference when you're getting in and out of armored vehicles, which often are tight spaces to begin with. Now, I have heard reports of some units now using M16A4s as DMR rifles. DMR is a term, designated marksman, or designated marksman. DMR rifle, I guess, is redundant. DMR, designated marksman rifle. And the designated marksman is not a sniper, right? Snipers are trained to do scouting and reconnaissance and that sort of thing. A designated marksman is trained only to engage targets at around 600, 700, 800 meters. So they have some specialty training, and they often have a specialty but still semi-automatic rifle to do it with. And the M16, with its longer barrel and greater muzzle velocity, is excellently positioned to do that, especially if you combine it with an optic with a 2 or 3 or 4 times magnification. That said, I was lucky that before our unit deployed, we had a rotating they call them mobile training teams. So it was a mix of military instructors and civilian instructors who we requested and offered a 2-week designated marksmanship course to our entire platoon. And it was awesome because it taught everyone just advanced shooting techniques to let them reach out and engage targets at 600 meters plus. Now, we weren't able to get, of course, when your entire platoon is designated marksmen, you can't give them all M16s, right? They still needed to do things like clear rooms. But just being that much more accurate meant that if they go to subsequent units, that they can fulfill a designated marksman role if their commander wants it.
Chronologically, that is how the upgrade went.
That is how the upgrade went for the Marines, yes. But for the Army, it was like a replacement for the M16A2.
Oh, who cares about the Army? They suck.
Who cares about the Marines? They suck. Marines are always out of money because they gotta go ask Daddy Navy for more money.
That's because the Marines are a department of the Navy.
Unlike the Army, which loves to piss away money unnecessarily.
Yeah, they do. The difference between the M4 and M4A1 is that the M4 is 3-round burst, whereas the M4A1 is full auto and has a heavy barrel.
What do you call the M4 that's not?
So, yeah, this is actually interesting because, well, we talked about this in an earlier video, but the military adopted the 3-round burst. After Vietnam, they found that soldiers would often, in a panic, burn through large portions of their ammo early in a firefight in order to try to return fire at the enemy. And the military decided they wanted some sort of check on this sort of spastic fire, because if you burn all your ammo early in a firefight, the later part can get very dangerous. And so they made it, instead of full auto, they made it 3-round burst with each trigger. Plus, if you've ever actually shot a fully automatic weapon, you know that it's very hard to control. And while suppressing or just shooting rounds in the general direction of the enemy is effective, the best suppression is always accurate fire over time. So the rounds, it's not the only rounds that count are the rounds that hit. That's not true. But the rounds have to have at least a general impression of accuracy in order to work, in order to achieve a tactical effect. And full auto is just anathema to that.
Not A1 to distinguish it from the other M4 that is an A1.
You just call it an M4.
That's confusing. You should call it the M4A0.
No, you just call it the M4.
Yeah, you could, but that might be confusing to people.
That isn't confusing.
It is to people who aren't frequent with M4 parlance.
So, okay, the reason it's called the M4 is because it is the 4th carbine officially adopted by the U.S. military. Now, you might recall in World War II, there was the M1 Garand, a rifle, but there was also an M1 carbine. And there have, of course, been, I think it was in .30 caliber, but since World War II, there's been 2 other carbines-ish that the military adopted, sort of. And so this is, the M4 is its 4th iteration. Obviously, some carbines are adopted, but never really produced at scale, though the M1 carbine was, and the M4 certainly was.
Your point is null and void.
And that's why I'm calling it the M4A0.
You can do that if you want to, but nobody else is gonna know what you're talking about. I didn't see a P90. Oh god, there's a token. Oh, and it's only 38 cash. Fucking Tokarev.
I take it a Tokarev is not a good gun.
It's a fucking piece of trash is what it is.
Buy it. Show me.
All right.
Buy those wrenches too, because it sounds like we might need to fix it. Yeah?
Behold the Tokarev. Yeah, it's pretty shit.
That seems decent enough.
The Tokarev is pretty much a copy of a Colt 1911, only in the worst ways possible. The Tokarev TT-33 is to the Colt 1911 what an Arbani suit is to an Armani suit. You see that little C-clip on the right-hand side of it right there?
On the barrel?
No, underneath the slide, this little C-clip right there. That holds the pins in place.
That holds the weapon together?
Yeah, pretty much. And sometimes...
Yeah, guys, the Soviets copied a lot of American hardware. They really did. And it's a tried and true method of saving yourself, making your enemy do all your engineering work, then you capture their technology, you reverse engineer it, and you build your own. They did that with US fighters and bombers, and they've done it, as you can see, with the Colt 1911 pistol. That said, when you take a pistol or rifle that's built for one specific caliber, like 45 ACP, which the Soviet bloc never used, and try to convert it into a different caliber, it can be a tough engineering prospect, because often the parts and their clearances and how they fit together is pretty dependent on the sizing of the other parts of the gun, right? You can't just like scale it up and down. It can feel a little bit like messing with a Microsoft Word document when you have pictures, where you move a picture a little bit and it just throws off every other part of your formatting, right? So when they tried to put it in a Soviet caliber, it just created a lot, or I don't know this for sure, but when you do that with firearms, it creates a lot of engineering problems. See the AK-50 for an example, where it should just be a big AK design, but as Brendan Herrera has found out, it creates just a series of engineering problems instead of just making, everything 30% bigger.
Sometimes when you're shooting this, that clip will come off, and then the gun will go blap and just fall apart. It's kind of a piece of junk. Originally, it was in 7.62 by 25, which is just an absolute zipper of a cartridge. They're such hot pieces of garbage.
Let's murder the next man with it.
I learned how to disassemble and repair the Tokarev TT-33. The advice we generally got was, yeah, don't worry about repairing it, just throw it out, you'll find another one.
Really?
Just throw out the bad part and save it for parts.
I feel like I could do more damage if I smacked someone in the head with a graphing calculator than I could by shooting at them with a high point.
Those things are heavy.
Okay, so a high point is not a Tokarev. The high point is one of the least expensive and cheapest manufactured pistols in America. It is not very reliable at all. It is really, really a pain to disassemble. They just have a host of issues. Their ergonomics is garbage. But because they are so inexpensive, they're the least expensive pistol that you can legally buy. They are incredibly popular among criminals, right? These are criminals who want either guns that they can use in committing a crime and then throw away or dispose of at no cost, or they're just so economically impoverished that's the only weapon they can afford, or they don't understand the difference in gun reliability and just believe it's sort of like buying printer paper, right? Cheap, expensive, they're all sort of the same. Obviously with firearms, they're not. Quality makes a difference. But as a result of its popularity with criminals, the high point is actually one of the most lethal firearms in the United States, despite having basically no redeeming qualities.
You know how normally on a gun, if I want to load around on this thing, I can take the mag out, put the mag in, and then pull the slide back like this? A high point, you can just hold the high point straight up in the air, and then rip your arm back real fast, and that'll chamber around into it.
That's not safe.
No, it really isn't. But if you need a gun, and you need it real cheap, you can get a high point for $120.
Oh man. Guess.
Or just pick up a rock for all the effectiveness.
Hey, fellow.
Oh, God.
$120. And it's got to be like a 22, like a high point 22, right? But you can imagine, again, if you're someone who is planning on, you want to be able to dispose of that gun, then it's sort of like the equivalent of buying a burner phone, right? Why would you buy a $1,200 iPhone 13, right, just to dispose of it after you commit a crime? Or you would buy the $100 like Huawei garbage hauler and trash it after you've done what you need to do with it.
Damn it, just take my guns!
Here, have the Tokarev.
Hopefully he forgets that I gave it to him and just keeps it. I think he's a frickin' monkey's paw. Yep, hunting a revolver with a scope and 4570 government. I have no desire to use this.
Wait, really? Because it's a hunting revolver and a powerful caliber?
I don't want to use scoped weapons.
Wait, not even for long-distance sniping?
This isn't a long-distance sniper rifle, it's a revolver.
So you do want to use scopes, just not on your revolver.
Where did I even find a speed loader in 4570?
3D print that stuff.
That's the thing.
That's when they talk about so in some ways the 3D printing revolution is very overhyped. And one of the reasons is because machine shops, since the last century have been able to manufacture the things you want if you have certain basic equipment, a lathe and a punch and some other things, right? So the idea that you can do 3D printing with plastic on the cheap is like nifty, but it's not the game changer that people think it is. Even in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, they would call homemade firearms zip guns, and it's completely possible to do. Though possible does not mean legal. Do not do those things. Don't even try to. Because again, it's really complicated. Unless you know the metallurgy of the materials you're using, they may not be able to withstand the pressures of operating as a firearm. In addition to, again, being a crime. Now, the idea of like 3D printing accessories can be pretty nifty, because if you need a speed loader and an obscure caliber, you can just go online, pay $2, download the file, and use your 3D printer to spit you out a basic speed loader in your apartment. And that is pretty nifty. And actually, again, if you're talking about things like storage or small adapters, small parts that aren't used directly in the operation of a firearm, nothing wrong with it, right? Just like you can 3D print almost anything. You can 3D print small plastic car parts, adapters for things. So in some ways it can be a revolution, but in a lot of ways it's overhyped.
That you're thinking about.
Where did I even find a speed loader in 4570 for this thing? That makes no sense. You know, I actually just realized something. The charging handle on this AUG moves when I shoot it. The AUG has a non-reciprocating charging handle.
Oh, that's a glitch. It's an error.
It's not a glitch. It's just whoever did this didn't know that the AUG did that.
Not everybody knows everything about guns, Zach.
I don't know everything about guns.
You sure?
Yeah.
You could fool some people.
I do not know everything about guns. There's a lot of stuff I don't know.
Like...
How am I going to tell you about what I don't know?
What?
Well, most people have a sense of some of the things they don't know. Like one of the things that I suspect, and again, this is a conversation we sort of had on the podcast, which, by the way, guys, check out Combat Veteran Breakdown Podcast. I actually had an episode with Zach Hazard. We had a 2-hour conversation. It was awesome, and the link is in the description to the podcast. Definitely give it a listen. I'm also on Spotify and iTunes. What's interesting is actual snipers, like properly trained snipers and long-range shooters, will have what's called a dope book, or data on previous engagements. And there is a whole field around ballistics that involve how bullets behave when fired. Because remember, they don't go in a straight line, right? They're a projectile. They're going to arc. But they're also going to cut through the air. So they're going to respond and behave slightly differently in different levels of humidity. They can also get blown slightly off course by the wind. Even at long distances, the curvature of the earth will mean that you may shoot, and even if you're at 0 feet of sea level, you may have to add just a little bit extra arc to account for the fact that there may be a few inches per mile of, or a few inches per 1,000 feet of like drop based on just the curvature of the earth. So it can be really technical. In addition to the fact that every bullet has slightly different manufacturing characteristics. One bullet may be a few micrograms heavier, one bullet may have a few micrograms more propellant. All these things impact the way the bullet moves. So having that data is essential for long range shooting. But you can see, if you look at like 9-hole reviews, that's an example of an excellent shooter who sort of, I mean, you can watch him learn about the weapon as he engages it, right? How to hold, where your target holds are, how the bullet behaves, what kind of ammo they're shooting. It's really interesting to watch their channel. But it's a whole field that you might not know, even if you are super familiar with different firearms.
Something you don't know about this Steyr AUG. You probably don't know the year it was created.
I know the year it entered service.
Yeah, exactly.
1977.
Oh, okay. Then you probably don't know it's a 5.56.
Yes, I do.
Oh, then you probably don't know.
So all NATO weapons after about 55 or 56 fire 5.56 rounds. And that is because there's an expectation that NATO forces would be fighting together against Soviet bloc forces. And imagine if you had a French regiment adjacent to a British regiment fighting in, West Germany. Then that regiment required some 7.62 ammo for the French and some 303 British for the British, right? The logistics, two totally different logistics chains tracing all the way back to their home countries would be total nonsense. And, if one country like the United States was doing the logistics and they were providing the troops, then the US would have to retool its factories to make obscure countries' rounds. And so NATO said, no, we are going to have a standard pistol round, 9mm, a standard rifle round, 5.56, and I believe they standardized things like the 40mm grenade launcher, so they're interchangeable. And I think they also standardized mortars and howitzers, but I'm not certain.
Know about
So if you see a NATO rifle, you automatically know if it's a standard issue infantry rifle like the Steyr AUG. It shoots 5.56.
the A1 variant.
This one has a scope that's permanently part of the receiver assembly. The A1 variant, the scope can actually come off. Actually, technically, the one I own is a Steyr AUG A3M1.
Okay, I take it back. You do know everything about guns.
No, I don't! I don't know everything about guns! I got an AK-40... I got an AK-74 and I'm itching to use it.
You keep on accidentally calling it the AK-47.
Yeah, I'm not a huge AK fanboy, so it doesn't really matter to me.
It's an AK number, who cares?
Yeah, it's an AK. I got an AK and I'm itching to use it.
I also have an Alaska.
You get a lot of people that get all bent out of shape when you start calling them, when you refer to an AKM as an AK-47. They're like, oh.
Okay, I'm just going to point out there's some serious hypocrisy here. Because this entire series is dedicated to Zach being upset when people misnomer things.
Well, actually, there's a difference because the AK-47 is a milled receiver and the AKM is a stamped sheet metal receiver, and technically that one's a post-57 AK-47. It's just like, shut up, okay? Nobody cares.
So, is it the AK-47 because it was the 47th patent?
No, it's the AK-47 because that's when I entered service. And technically, anything that is like this one, that's a stamped sheet metal receiver, that would make it an AKM, except that it's not an AKM because it's in 545 by 39. So, whatever. Oh, we gotta go to the Ironworks. I was following my compass and I realized I went the wrong way because I started ranting about guns.
Yeah!
Okay, all right, let's talk a little bit about the AK-74. Give you guys a little background because I am sort of a Soviet technology nerd. Now, the AK-74 was the primary service rifle that was adopted in, 1974. Why did the Soviets switch away from the AK? It's a pretty iconic rifle, or the AKM. Well, one, they looked at the American experience in Vietnam, and the US had done basically the same thing. They took their M14, which had a larger caliber and therefore smaller magazines and was very heavy, and replaced it with the M16, which fired a 5.56 round. The military found the 5.56 round, being smaller and lighter, was still just as effective at the distances that most combat happened, and it was actually really lethal because unlike a 7.62 round, which sort of hits hard but will often penetrate right through a target, the smaller 5.56 round was way more likely to hit something and kind of break apart. So being small and fragile was actually an asset to improve its lethality. But more importantly, it's logistically so easy to transport a smaller round when you're talking about rounds at the scale of millions. You can also it's lighter for the individual soldier to carry, so they can carry more rounds, but it's way easier to transport them by the truckload, right? Trucks can carry 30% more, let's say, or a ship, or even things like manufacturing raw materials, right? Again, when you talk about millions of rounds, even a round that's just 3% smaller, 5% smaller, can save tons and tons of raw material. So the Soviets looked and they said, we want a service rifle that solved the same problems the Americans encountered in Vietnam. And they adopted the AK-74. It fires a 5.45 round, which has similar ballistic characteristics to a 5.56. But obviously, the Soviets did not want to actually give their soldiers 5.56 rounds, because then the enemy could just steal it and use it, right? The enemy being NATO. So they did the 5.45. And they added also an advanced type of compensator, right? You may notice the AK barrels are just, well, they're just barrels, right? They just end. The AK-74 has a very, very special type of compensator, so that when you fire it on fully automatic or fire like pop, pop, pop at a very fast rate, it doesn't drift up. It sort of pushes back straight, so that your rounds are more likely to stay on target.
Adventures! Was that an adventure?
That was negligent discharging of your weapon.
That was me shooting. I wasn't a negligent discharge. I did it on purpose. I shot the rock on purpose.
Yes, and it's very negligent of you.
Not negligent. I did it on purpose.
I know. I'm not saying it's...
I know what's behind my target.
Did I say accidental? I don't think I did. It's intentional negligence.
There wasn't
Wasting ammo is the negligence here.
negligent, though. I knew what
Especially, guys, if you don't know, there has been a ban actually on Russian ammunition purchases in the United States. This is a complicated international issue, but basically as part of U.S. sanctions against Russia, they want to try to, punish Putin and his closest allies. As you can imagine, many of Putin's closest allies are Russia's defense contractors who manufacture and sell this ammunition. But because of U.S. gun culture, a huge amount of revenue for these companies is earned not through the Russian Ministry of Defense, but in selling this ammo to U.S. consumers. These are often standard Soviet-type rounds, 7.62, the obscure Makarov 9mm, all these rounds, 5.45, right? All of which are sold in the United States, enriching, right, America's enemies, which is, sort of silly when you think of it like that. And so recently, there has been a ban on importing Russian ammo. To import it would be a sanctions violation, and you do not want to play around with sanctions violations. The U.S. federal government does not play. But it means that no one is really sure what the future of Russian ammo will look like. Will they find non-Russian manufacturers who will meet the market demand? Probably, right? Eventually, someone will retool their factory and sell it in the States because, the AKs are hungry and demand food. But it will take some time, and prices will probably never be as low as they were when factories were just churning out Russian military equipment and then selling surplus to the United States.
I was doing. I can see the rock. I can see what's behind it. I intended to destroy the rock.
And it could you don't think maybe the bullet could ricochet off of it?
No, of course not.
Ricochets don't exist?
No, I was using frangibles.
Flèche rounds?
No, frangibles are... It's usually like a copper jacket with like powdered lead on the inside of it.
Full copper jacket.
It's still a jacket, but then the moment it hits anything, the bullet basically just disintegrates.
Hooray! I learned things about guns and you learned things about English.
Joke's on you, I didn't learn anything about English. Woo!
Yeah, frangible ammunition. Obviously, shooting powdered lead can be a little dangerous. It's not great. So something tells me in the world of Fallout, lead poisoning is the least of your problems.
When did I get this? It looks like some kind of AK, maybe an AK-12?
I don't even think AKs go that low.
They do. AK-400.
Significantly more than what you said.
The rear sight is odd in that it's mounted to the rail system, and also it looks like it's based on an RPK rear sight.
It kind of looks like an M16 or an M4.
No, it does not look like an M16 or an M4.
No, that's pretty different.
Or you see how the top cover looks like the little Fast Freddy silhouette? That's how you definitely know that it's an AK.
Just like in the M16.
No, not like in the M16. It also apparently has a side-folding stock, and I see a 1 on there, which leads me to believe it's got a collapsing M4 stock on it. Where'd it go?
Oh, it's gone forever now.
Oh, God. Seriously?
No, it's here.
Oh, Jesus.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, this is definitely something that's branded like an AK-400. There is actually, the Russian military has adopted, I want to say it's called the AK-101. There are new versions of the AK that take the AK technology, and like with the M4, the way the M4 sort of brings the M16 basic build into the 21st century, Russia is as part of a larger military modernization program that has been, by and large, successful. They're trying to do the same with their service rifle and get something that looks much more like the M4, where remember, you have an M4, you can take an M4 out of a military police company's arms room and give it to a special forces operator, and if they have access to the right doodads and equipment, they can install a suppressor, install advanced optics, install, almost anything you could want to turn that weapon into what you need it to be. Its modularity is pretty huge and pretty significant, right? Install flashlights. I mean, and this is one of the reasons it's so popular among firearms enthusiasts is the United States, is that you buy your base M4, but then sort of like a PC, you can accessorize it into a rifle that's specialized into what you want. And obviously the AK-74 doesn't really have that, right? They have like a scope mount and that's about it. So the Russians said, hey, we too want something that you can put the exact optic you want. If you want a 4x scope, or you want like an EOTech hollow sight, you want in this case, it looks like it has some sort of AK-74 inspired muzzle brake, but you can install a muzzle brake or a suppressor or a flash hider, right? You can change out the buttstock for different buttstocks. These are all things that they want to be able to do with their rifles, right? Let units customize them to the mission.
So yeah, it's just a modified AK. That looks kind of like an ergo grip that's on there. That looks kind of like an ergo stock, but it does have a collapsing M4 style stock.
Told you!
That muzzle device is different. It looks like a modified AK-74 muzzle device. It has an adjustable gas system too. That's interesting.
Is that useful for anything?
Adjustable gas systems are useful if the weapon gets fouled, because then you just set it on the adverse settings. It's also useful if the weapon gets like muddy or dirty, and if you're running some kind of suppressor on the front of it, you might want lower gas pressure.
Just like in the M16.
No, Mike, it's not like in the M16 doesn't have an adjustable gas system. It's direct impingement.
Nothing can stand up to the M16 you're wielding.
It's not an M16. It's an AK-400.
It's a fantasy rifle, right?
I don't know. There might be an AK-400. There's so many different AKs. There's like the AK-101, the AK-112, the AK-12, the AN-94. There's too many different ones. I can't remember all of them.
It disintegrated. I don't think you did that with ballistics.
Whoa! Trench shotgun?
Didn't seem to help that guy.
At least the shotgun fared better than he did.
But I don't know if it's going to be useful against robots. So
this is not a trench shotgun?
No, it's not.
This is a Winchester 1887, and the Winchester 1897 was the trench gun.
But wouldn't any shotgun that gets thrown in a trench be, by definition?
Yes, by definition, it will be a trench shotgun, but the one everybody calls the trench gun is a Winchester 1897. This is a Winchester 1887. You can tell it because it's a lever action shotgun. The other one is a pump action shotgun.
So it's deceptive marketing.
I got this thing.
Okay, so why do they call it the trench gun? The trench gun is because in World War I, U.S. troops were fairly unique in that they would often, I believe it would be even standard issue to some troops, try to clear trenches with a shotgun. As you can imagine, somewhere like trench warfare, right, where there's a lot of small bunkers, there's a lot of tight quarters, having a compact shotgun that fired, buckshot or a spread fire was extremely effective and extremely lethal. So much so that some German forces actually petitioned to have shotguns banned in trench warfare. This was, of course, rich coming from the country that implemented flamethrowers. Now, it is... right, the trench gun was one of the pump-action shotguns. You can see Grantham has an awesome video on it, and it's pretty iconic for that reason, though its design is not perfect, right? But you can see how modern shotguns, like the Remington 870 and the Mossberg 500, learned a lot from this sort of pump action, but improved upon it in some ways. Notably that the trench shotgun, when you cycle it, has this little bar that comes out right above your hand. And if you accidentally have your hand hiked up too high, you actually won't be able to cycle the rifle, or your hand will get hit by this little bar.
What the hell is this?
Yeah, happy birthday! It's a gun.
Happy birthday to me! This looks like a Daewoo.
I don't know what a Daewoo is.
It's Korean.
It sounds Japanese.
Or well, no, Daewoo is Korean. It's either a Daewoo or it's a Japanese, right? It looks like it's got a chrysanthemum on it.
It looks like it's got a samurai helmet on the sight.
It looks like the Japanese muzzle brake on like the Type 103 or something.
I believe it is a Type, yes.
Well, I mean, because that definitely looks like
That looks Japanese, yeah.
Japanese characters on the selector.
Yeah.
I can see a 3, and then one I'm assuming is safe, one is probably semi, one is 3-round burst, and one is full.
Oh, that's probably what the 3 is, 3-round burst.
Yeah. Got those sights there. There's a big hole for where the charging handle should go through because it's a reciprocating charging handle. That straight-ish magazine leads me to believe it's 5.56. It's either a Daewoo K1 or it's the Japanese Type, I think it's like a 103 or something.
How familiar are you with Japanese assault rifles?
Not super familiar because they don't really exist outside of Japan.
Japan not known as a huge weapons exporter.
No, they don't really make a whole lot of guns for export. Actually, a lot of Browning guns are made in Japan and then sold in the US. So a lot of Browning bolt-action rifles are made by a company called Miroku in Japan.
I was unaware.
Anyway, I think it's like the Type 103.
So, guys, what's interesting is that Japan, in its post-World War II constitution, is forbidden from using the military for any purpose other than self-defense. And it is controversial because other than a handful of exceptions, for example, a tiny Japanese contingent supported the U.S. in the Iraq War, but they, I believe, were not armed. They supported by having like rear echelon, like humanitarian or medical facilities. However, in light of the militarization of the South China Sea, sort of led by Chinese aggression, Japan has recently embarked on a program to make more robust its self-defense forces. So it does have a lot of in-house manufactured weapons such as this. But I believe, though I'm not certain, I believe they also are forbidden from selling their weapons to other states, but I'm not certain. Let me know in the comments if you have some insight over whether Japan's in-house arms industry can export.
Maybe Type 94, but Type 94 might be the Chinese rifle.
You're pretty close.
Type 89!
That's that, all right.
Let's take a look. Where'd it go?
Where'd you drop it?
I dropped it and it just oh, it launched all the way over here.
All right.
By drop it, he meant launched it.
Well, what are those rubber rifles? Yep, they bounce a lot.
Yeah, so that's a Type 89. It's the Japanese standard issue rifle, and the first thing that indicated that to me was the muzzle brake.
Is that a distinct muzzle brake?
Yeah, that's a very distinctive muzzle brake that the Type 89 is like one of the only guns that uses. And I just couldn't remember because I have too many gun numbers in my head
Yeah.
and they get confused. And it's not one that I see on a daily basis.
Right, so take a look at this gun. This is an example, again, of the pre-sort of modular revolution firearm, right? Look at the stock. The stock may be removable and customizable, but it doesn't fold, it doesn't telescope, you can't adjust it in any way. You also have these iron sights, which is fixed. So that is what you have on this weapon. There's no way to mount different anything onto the rail. There's not even a place really to mount, say, a laser sight or a flashlight. And it's not clear that this distinct muzzle brake could be removed and replaced with, say, a suppressor. So what you have overall is a very, very standard weapon, standard infantry rifle for sort of good for one thing, and if you want it for different roles, you just have to like train around it. And again, the future is going to be, or is the present. Modern rifles have just so much more mission customization options.
I think it entered service in like mid to late 80s, hence the Type 89.
Oh, they didn't go through 88 previous types to get to it?
No, I think the Japanese do the year it entered service or something along those lines, because the reason this throws me off is there's actually a few guns that are slightly different. Like there's one that's the SIG SP-2022, which is a handgun, and the only reason it's called the SP-2022 is not because that's when it entered service, it's when it was projected to exit service.
We've already been over this. There are no standard naming conventions.
No, there aren't. There's so many different ones. But anyway,
Yeah, even within countries, they struggle to like keep to a standard naming convention. And I'm not entirely sure why. I sort of suspect that it may be because, like, you know, in Japanese, there may be like an SP 2022 that's like something like military, but totally unrelated. So like Pay System Reform Project 2022, right? Or like, you know, some sort of new weapons, you know, some sort of new like armored vehicle deployment program, right? Something that's like totally unrelated, but already has the acronym. And so they have to replace it with something else.
That muzzle brake is very distinctive to the Japanese rifle. I believe there's a company, I think it's JP Enterprises. They make what's called the, or it might be the Type 89 muzzle device, but you can buy one of those muzzle devices for your AR-15.
Well, I've never heard of this particular rifle before, but it's got to be pretty reliable. I mean, look at all those holes in it.
That doesn't make it more reliable, Mike.
You're right, it doesn't, but it does make it go faster.
Anyway, it's a
He's thinking of the orcs from Warhammer 40k. Red makes them go faster.
really cool looking rifle, and I kind of wish that I could actually get my hands on one in person, but this is probably as close as I'll ever get to that.
So we just enjoy it, as well as this other shotgun I got you.
Ooh, what is it?
The WA-101 Tactical Shotgun.
All right, so what do we got here? We have the foregrip of a Thompson submachine gun. We have the sights of a Thompson submachine gun. We have the bolt mechanism of what looks to be modeled after a Remington 1100. It's got Picatinny rails on the sides and top of it, a muzzle device that doesn't really make any sense, a magazine that doesn't really go to it, the back of some type of
Yeah, this is pure cursed gun action.
pump action or semi-automatic shotgun, along with the stock from an FN rifle. So it's just made out of a bunch of different stuff.
It's also got a weird-looking magazine.
Yeah, the magazine looks like they took a BAR mag and just modified it.
It's got to be based on a real shotgun, right?
The receiver looks like it's modeled after a Remington 1100, or just some semi-auto shotgun.
Sure.
Other than that, no, it's not really modeled after any real shotgun.
You're saying this is an imaginary hodgepodge?
Yeah, it's an imaginary hodgepodge of parts. It looks like it was kit bashed.
Kit
No.
bashed?
Yeah.
Like someone assembled a bunch of different parts together?
Yeah, they just took parts from different kits and slapped them all together and made it look like this thing. What caliber is this?
12 gauge?
I guess it could be 12 gauge, but that barrel does not look big enough to be 12 gauge. I can...
No, I mean, here's the thing. There's not really any reason to have a muzzle device on a shotgun because there's just so much kick to the round. And like what would a compensator do? Like, no compensator would be powerful enough to stop the kick. Also, because it's shooting like buckshot, or it can shoot buckshot because some shotgun rounds are, a muzzle device is actually just a liability.
I can generally fit most of my thumb into a 12 gauge barrel, and I don't think I could fit most of my thumb into that. It looks like it'd be a 410 gauge. It says it's 12 gauge, which, unrelated note, I have 666 extra 12 gauge rounds.
Right.
666, the number of the beast. 666.
Maybe
Wow, that was intense.
it's not your standard 12 gauge round. Maybe it's 12 by 19 parabellum rounds.
God, shut up. Whatever.
He's just trying to trigger him at this point. That's like so that's just the stupidest thing.
Mike, you need to know that if you...
Okay, guys, we are going to pause it right there. We are at like 43 minutes as it is, and boy, oh boy, we have at least another third of these gun rants to go. But guys, thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to check out the podcast. Check out the other video, right? I'm going to try to put it right up here.